Okay, shall we get rolling?
Let's go ahead and get started.
All right.
All right. So just quick introductions. My name is Aaron Crosman. I'm a senior specialist at Attain. I work within the Salesforce Services group, and I specialize in doing Drupal to Salesforce integrations. You can mostly find me online by my first initial and last name, and if it's not me, it's probably my dad, and he's a nice guy who'll send you my way. But I've been on Drupal.org for a little over 13 years. My actual work in Drupal goes back further than that by a little bit. I've done stuff in Drupal with every version since 4.6. And you can find me online if you actually want to see what I write on my own. My background is a fairly traditional computer science path. I was a computer science major, got a job out of college in the teeth of the dot-com bust at a large nonprofit organization where they kind of handed the young kid a variety of random tasks to go do stuff and figure out what made sense. One of the things I was handed was an ancient Windows NT web server and said, make it work. That project eventually evolved into my running Drupal sites on Linux servers and eventually became the web director for that organization. So at one point, I could actually describe my job reasonably as I was the web director for a multi-million-dollar international Nobel Peace Prize winning organization. It is probably the coolest sounding job I will ever have. But that gave me a background in nonprofit development, communications, fundraising, crisis response. That's where I was first introduced also to Salesforce and the community that built up on that side. And in my own time, I also do some spinning and knitting and other things to keep myself entertained.
And I'm Kaylan Wagner. I started writing, as it says, HTML many moons ago when GeoCities still had neighborhoods. And the blink tag and marquee were the greatest things ever. So some of the old sites, thank God they don't exist, because they were pretty horrible. I also can still rattle off table codes like nobody's business, so I am perfectly qualified to do email marketing in the modern day and age. I kind of forewent the web development side when I got into college and shifted over to arts and got a degree in graphic design. And then along the way had a large number of non-tech related jobs. I worked in a barn feeding horses every morning. Also in a coffee shop for a while, then as a interpretive specialist in a museum, which was actually quite fun. And then got into the tourism industry doing graphic design work and technically maintaining a website, but it was built on a very custom PHP system that was kind of a hacked version of Joomla, and I wasn't allowed access to anything useful. From there, though, through a lot of effort in the spare time that I didn't really have, and connections and starting to attend Drupal camps, I was able to transition into a developer role at a publishing company in town. And then from there have shifted into what I kind of joke are Drupal adjacent jobs. It's still very relevant to Drupal is very relevant to my career. I work with Drupal on a daily basis, but I've been a technical account manager doing multilingual implementations on enterprise websites. I spent a stint at Commerce Guys helping them wrangle their partners like Square and PayPal, Evalera, a few others. And now I'm currently a customer success manager at Pantheon. So I help people come online on the platform, bring their websites up to speed, do performance analysis, help them make their sites run really fast. So it's been a kind of crazy little endeavor. I kind of look back and go, where was I 6 years ago? Oh, okay, this is different. But it's been a lot of fun. And if you are interested in working at Pantheon, we're hiring. So if we have a booth, come talk to us. I have to do the plug. So we can proceed. This is my slide. This is a new slide. We realized we needed to say what we were talking about. So, what's the plan today? And this is my cat very patiently waiting to hear said plan. Hey, welcome. Come on in. Yeah, perfect timing. We're just getting into the important stuff. So today we're kind of going to be covering the world of jobs in a loose sense of from two different perspectives. As you heard from Aaron's introduction, he has a more traditional developer path in the industry, and I have the less traditional path. So we kind of want to approach this to sort of show what you can do with Drupal in your career now and then moving forward, whether that stays in Drupal or whether that transitions just into whatever the next greatest thing is, because technology changes. Or from my side, if you want to crack into the technical world, but you've worked in a museum or the tourism industry for most of your adult life, how do you get into technology? You know, how do you make that transition? How do you justify the experience that you had and say, no, this is relevant? And so I will pass back to Aaron.
So I'm going to kind of talk broadly about kind of long-term career arc and ways to leverage Drupal as part of that long-term planning and thinking. For me, it's important to kind of actually start out with that, with making sure that folks are clear that Drupal is, for most of us, going to be a pass-through technology in our career. When I graduated from college, there were quite literally 5 people who'd contributed code. I went and checked. I'm pretty sure at that point nobody had been paid. It wasn't a professional thing you could do. By the time I retire in another 25 years, it's incredibly unlikely that being a Drupal developer will be a thing that you can do as a career. Drupal will be a tool that is important in my career as a developer that I will pass through. Many of us have met the person who works somewhere in an IT operation or in the finance department of a large organization or somewhere in a often literally dark back corner, passionately defending some piece of technology that they grew up on, and they are hoping to get to their retirement before somebody forces them to replace the tool, because they do not want or have the capacity or feel like they have the capacity to transition off that old thing onto something new. And so they become doggedly determined to defend that tool. None of us really like that person. I've been good friends with people who are in that role, and they don't usually like being that person because it's terrifying. It's really scary to be 62 in the technical field and worried that your job's going to go away, because rebooting at that point for another couple of years is super hard. And so planning that transition long term is, to me, kind of fundamental to thinking about how you're going to stand really on any technical platform, but in this case, Drupal in particular. The picture there is actually the Miller Theater in Augusta, Georgia. And at the time I took that picture, they had just barely saved the building from total demolition. And they have since fully renovated it. And it is now back to being a gorgeous theater, and they put on wonderful productions. It looks lovely again, having very nearly been totally destroyed. I think the building analogy actually works really well as you think about your career. If you continue to do the maintenance to your professional life, to making sure your skill set is staying up to date, that it's relatively easy to keep up as long as you're doing the routine maintenance of your skill set. If you don't, your skills will rot. You will end up having been outrun by the entire technology world that surrounds us, and you're going to be looking at, how do I totally renovate my career midstream? And that's not always a successful thing. People don't always pull that off. Many people do. Many people have no choice, but they're not always successful. And again, it's a scary place to be. So being continuously looking about where you're going next, what makes sense down the line, where is the technology headed, what other skills can I acquire that are going to make me more flexible? Particularly for those of us who have code-based jobs. Whether it's front-end code, back-end code, if you write code, there's a bot coming for your job, and it will win one day. Somebody will write a piece of code that does your job better than you do, and it will win. That may not be today, but it will be soon. And so being ready to stay a step ahead of those automations and those code generators and all the things that are coming for us. which is a great cheery thought on 8 o'clock on a Saturday morning. But the driver to that is to keep learning. And one of the things that I think Drupal really brings is an excellent platform for learning a wide variety of skills, both by its open source nature and being an open platform, but also by the community that we've built around it. That not all open source projects, even large successful open source projects, have large active communities that actually work in public. Many of them have some kind of technology stack and then paid proprietary bolt-ons, or things that are carefully guarded as internal secrets of specific companies and agencies. Drupal has some of that, but by and large, what we really have is a very open community where people do their work in public, where they share their best practices in public. You can learn from your own projects, from other people's projects. There's the conferences, there's endless supplies of blogs, groups, because the licensing fees for the vast majority of the things we all do are non-existent. You have opportunities to try out ideas and totally fail and have risked largely your own time and not have invested heavily in some set of licenses and then go, oh, well, that was totally the wrong way to do this. You've downloaded a couple of modules, you tried them out, they turned out to be the wrong solution to your problem, but now you know that and you're smarter and you're better off. And you can move on. When we're contributing code, you have opportunities not only to be providing back to the community, but to get the feedback from it. One of the things that I did yesterday morning when I was sitting around the code sprint is I actually posted a piece of code that, quite frankly, I know is not terribly good. It's posted to an issue where nobody has figured out the right solution to the problem. And so there are a number of people who've put forward potential solutions to say, here is a way to solve this problem. Let's find a better one, because here are the 16 things wrong with mine. And we know we need a better solution to this problem, but we haven't found it yet. And it gives us an opportunity to engage and discuss and work together to find that solution. And yeah, we're doing that in public. Yes, there's that opportunity for us to kind of fall on our noses in a space where it's kind of recorded for perpetuity that I posted code that I know isn't great. But it's also an opportunity for me to be exposing that I'm trying to help the whole community move forward. I'm engaged with everybody, and I get the benefit of their learning as well. So finding ways that even things that look like they should be easy, and that particular example, it was just posting a file in a particular way to a particular third-party service. And it seems, every one of us is on like, this should be really easy. It turns out not to be easy. And once we solve it, I suspect we'll all look back and go, oh, okay, it was. Now that once we find the answer, it'll have been obvious. But it's not obvious yet. And the last piece of the opening here is the being part of this community and getting to know the people in it, and getting to understand how it works as a resource and a connection. It's been a conversation for the last couple of years. If you've been around the Drupal community, it's not always been a particularly well-run or healthy conversation, but talking about what does it mean to be in the community versus not in the community. And it's usually been in a context of a kind of a punitive view of the code of conduct. And whether you're in a space like this one where the code of conduct applies, or you're on Twitter and the code of conduct doesn't really apply, to some extent, to me, I take a very broad view and say it doesn't really matter. You need to be operating as if you're going to get along with these people, as if what you say in public is going to follow you, like it's on a recorded conference presentation and it might hang out on the internet for a very long time. That your Twitter feed, somebody might go back and read it. That person you spoke to in the hallway might be interviewing you 2 years from now. And that you kind of operate to some extent as if you're in the informal lunch, right? You have the formal part of your interview where everybody's sharp and careful, and then you go out to lunch and you have a slightly less formal conversation. To some extent, when you're in the community, you're in that lunch conversation more or less all the time. that the way you behave, the way you interact, is going to long-term reflect on you. It's not that you can't move past mistakes. People are generally nice, forgiving people. But if you're really out being a jerk and you pick up a reputation for being a jerk, don't be surprised if that reflects back on you 2-3 years out. Again, we do much of our work in public. Much of what we do, we are, the Pantheon slogan about, I make the internet. I also am well aware that the internet follows me, because I built some of the tools that do that. I know the people who built the really cool tools that do that really well. They worked really hard to make sure the internet hangs around and gets remembered. And so making sure that you remember that and are thinking about it, and how is it when I'm engaging on the issue queues that that's going to reflect back on me, and make sure that that's going to be a good reflection. Understanding, again, that we're all learning all the time. So again, you go read those issues that I've left over 13 years across D.O. Some of them are going to show you that I had no idea what I was talking about on some particular tool at some particular time. And I'm okay with that. Hopefully you won't find any where I look like a jerk. If you find one, actually please look me up and send me a note and say, hey, you look like a jerk over here, because I'd actually like to go clean that up, because that is an ongoing marker of our community. It's an ongoing marker of me. And I'd like to make sure I actually look good. Not just to be showing off, but because it makes the whole community look better. And it does, in the end, reflect on all of us. And so making sure you're tracking that and thinking about it and engaging in that way, so that you're able to continue to leverage the group of people around us, the people who are coming in, and that we have as large and as diverse a community as we can possibly have, so that we all benefit from that scale and that growth. I'm going to hand it back to Kaylan to talk about breaking into the code.
Yes. So Aaron's done a great job talking, if you have a more traditional developer career. I'm going to be taking this, as I mentioned earlier, from the perspective of trying to break into the Drupal community, or trying to break into where you would like to be. So my kind of thing here, the non-technical job history, it doesn't have to be a problem. Any job that you have had, anything that you have done, can have applicable skills and transferable knowledge and value. So just, to kind of reiterate for a couple folks that came in after the introductions, I worked in a barn. I fed horses in the morning. This was during college. And then I worked in a museum doing science and local history. I was a freelance graphic designer for a number of years. I worked in the tourism industry, and now I work in the Drupal adjacent communities of Pantheon. We also support WordPress, so I have to say, it's not just Drupal. I do have to go, back and forth, but we'll start with kind of the easy one. Graphic design is a closer transition because websites have design elements to them. I kind of use that as my gateway into this world, because I met up with a group of people who had a small Drupal shop and they didn't have anyone that could do design. And so I started kind of going, I do that, and I know what websites are. I've used them. I used to do really bad ones back in the day, but, let's talk. And I started attending Drupal camps to learn, because I was like, if I'm going to design for Drupal, I should probably know what that means. So that's kind of how I got into the community. But the graphic design background that I had, even though it was in print largely, still had a lot of really applicable skills. So when I was freelancing, I was responsible for setting expectations with my customers, saying, I'm going to be doing this thing for you and I'm going to deliver it at this time. I was responsible for scoping out what it was that they needed, and then also managing the scope creep that would inevitably come up. We've all had the customer who's come in and said, well, this is what I needed, but can it also do this? For me, it was more so, I know I told you that it needed to be red and blue, but it actually really needs to be pink. Can we do like revision round 10? And I'm like, no. So managing those pieces. And then with that, setting boundaries. You have to be able to say, this was the terms of the contract. This is what's agreed upon. We're stopping here. If you would like to renegotiate your contract with me, totally fine. This is still something that's relevant when you're working in the Drupal world as a developer. Hopefully your project manager is handling that part, but in case you're freelancing or you're working on a very small group and you are the project manager and the developer, these are relevant skills. It also, for me, taught me the proper valuation of my work. My time is valuable. You know, if you are freelancing as a Drupal person, it's really, I'm sure, quite common, even if you're not freelancing, somebody comes up to you and goes, hey, I need a website. Can you just like make me a website? And you kind of go, sure, for like 10 grand minimum? Or you don't. And we've all kind of been through that phase where it's like, oh yeah, sure, I could do a website for you for $500. And then 200 hours later, you realize that you've made nothing. You've wasted a lot of time. The customer's still not happy. And depending on how things go, a friendship is ruined. So the proper valuation of work and sticking to your guns there is something that I learned personally in that graphic design space. So I made a good case for the graphic design, but how is a museum relevant? And this is where we start kind of putting on the thinking cap and saying, well, what did I do there? I was an interpretive specialist. I greeted people at the front desk. I gave presentations, worked in a planetarium, and gave hour-long discussions on the stars. We did lots and lots of different things. But a lot of those things were public speaking, which, in case it was not obvious, has become relevant to my career. I also, on a daily basis, working at Pantheon as customer success manager, am leading meetings with anywhere from 2 to 15 to 20 people. And I'm the one in charge of that. And you have to be kind of calm. Like, yeah, it's not necessarily sitting in a room like this. It's on a Zoom screen and my cat walks past the camera and I kind of go, oh, so professional. But that ability to talk to people, I credit to spending a lot of time working in this museum and having to do that. I also learned the value of saying, I don't know the answer to that question. Let me look it up and get back to you. Because when you are in a trusted advisor role, people are going to take what you say seriously. And if you don't know the answer, don't make something up. I may have learned that the hard way. We'll just admit it. Sorry, Eric. He was my boss at the time. But I did get very comfortable with just saying, I don't know. And I say that more times than I want to, sometimes 3 times in a row in a meeting. And I just go, please let my customers not hate me for saying this. And they usually don't, because everyone understands that the concepts we're working with are really just, they're extensive. You can't know everything. You're not expected to know everything. And that's okay. Along with that, the communication, that kind of ties into the first 2, so I'm just going to skip over that. But the comfort zone smashing. There were a lot of mornings I'd walk into the museum and they'd be like, hey, we have a school group that really wants to do this one planetarium show that I think you've seen like twice maybe in the last 3 years. How do you feel about just running it? And half of it was live action interaction with me. And I'm going, sure, I can have a script and a flashlight in the dark in a dark planetarium. No one will notice that. This will be great. You just have to step up and do it. You may not be ready, but you have to just jump in. And that's really helpful when you're starting a new job, when you're trying to show the initiative during an interview process, to just jump in and go. But another thing, other than the jobs, is extracurricular activities. So, you know, say you're in college, you've only had the part-time jobs working in a coffee shop or at a stable. You haven't ever had a full-time position. But you've been involved with other things. You can tie that to a job loosely. I'm going to throw a caveat on here, largely at Aaron's suggestion, because he made a highly valuable point. Don't walk into a job interview and say, hey, I ran a guild on World of Warcraft for 3 years, and expect them to find that impressive. They're not going to. So if you're going to take one of these extracurricular paths, talk to your friends or your parents or grandparents or an uncle or an aunt or somebody who doesn't do this activity that you do and get their reaction first. Because if they go, I don't know about that one, I would try to find a creative way to rephrase it. So personally, I also spin in it. That's part of why Aaron and I are such good friends. I do play World of Warcraft. I also go to lots of camps, and that is very valuable in the Drupal world, trying to get into the experience. I also was part of a couple of professional organizations like Toastmasters, which focused on, oddly enough, public speaking. So, you all saw the knitting up there, and you're like, really? Knitting is going to help me get a job? To this I say, maybe not. Except yes, there are transferable skills from knitting into your job. If you think about this, Knitting something takes a very long time. It can occasionally get tedious if you're doing something very simple and you're like, crap, I just need to finish this baby blanket. The baby's gonna be here in 2 days. Requires patience. And you really begin to appreciate the value of documentation. Because if you look at this image up here, it's kind of hard to see, but it is a chart with lots of symbols in it. If I just see this, I'm going to go, what? As most of you probably are if you are not knitters. This came with extensive documentation. It is actually a stitch pattern to create a blanket. It looks very pretty when it's done. Without the documentation, you're lost, and so you kind of gain that appreciation. And then the concept of finding bugs. You get a lot of practice in that. If you look at this purple image down here, there's this little spot in the middle that looks wrong. I'm going to term that a bug. As you're going through a pattern that's very complicated, you may go, wait a minute, I needed to do 5 things here and I can only do 4. Where did I mess up? And then you're spending a ton of time going back through a fabric trying to figure out where you screwed up, searching for your bug, and it's a painful process, as it is when you're looking for bugs in your code. So I maintain that knitting can provide valuable skills. This is the kind of creative thinking that I'm talking about. But then we're gonna go into the surely you can't be serious MMOs. How does Warcraft help you in the workplace? I actually have a full hour-long talk on this subject that I will try to be trotting out to camp shortly. But in short, when you are doing these types of activities, you are working with a group of people remotely. You have to do in the minute, sometimes heated communication with each other to achieve a goal. You are technically working in a small, agile team at times with 4 other players trying to approach a situation. You try it once, you fail, you come back, you try a different approach. Is this not an agile methodology? And depending on what you end up doing in this, you can get some management experience. And this is the one where I caution you very strongly, know your audience if you're going to try to bring this up to a prospective employer. But technically speaking, if you are perchance running a guild, you can interview people to join your group. So you get a little bit of that kind of knowledge. You have to practice handling difficult situations between team members because everybody doesn't always get along. They're gonna come to you and they're gonna complain and you gotta deal with it. You have all of these just strangely job-like things that you do, and it does give you some experience there. And so I bring that one up largely because I think a lot of people suffer with imposter syndrome these days. And they go, oh, there's no way I could manage people. I've never done it before. But it's somebody who's running a very successful group of 100 people in a game. And they're getting together every week and they're doing the things that they need to do and everybody's doing a fantastic job and this person's at the helm of it. And it's like, but you're already doing it in a different context. So bring that internally and say, nope, I can do that. And go ahead and make the application. But be careful how you bring this up. The example that I'll use here is, I had a friend, met in an MMO, who when I was in college and working on getting my first job, I was like, man, Lori, I don't have the experience for this. And she goes, Kaylan. She said, let me explain to you how I talked about my college LARPing club, live action roleplay club. She said, basically we got together every week, we wore capes and we jumped off the stage screaming random spells. She's like, this is the extent of the club. She goes, but on my resume, it reads, maintained a fan-based organization during college that held regular meetings with up to 25 members at each meeting. I went, you are genius. You don't have to go into what it is. You can creatively discuss, because there are skills here. There's organization, there's stuff that you need to bring forward. And then the last piece of advice that I'm going to start getting into is that not all jobs involve coding. So if you are currently a non-technical person who would like to get into the Drupal sphere, you've met this community, you've been at this camp, and you've fallen in love, and you're just like, please let me get in there. I want to learn more. I want to have the excuse to do more. I want my employer to send me to these camps so I can learn more, instead of me funding it on my own. Not all jobs involve coding. They're not all super technical. If you have been a project manager in another sphere, you have skills that are useful. Yes, you may have to learn some new terminology. You might have to learn a new tool. You might have to just, you'll walk into your first meeting as a PM and go, you all said words that are English, and I'm convinced that there's something here that I need to manage, but I'm going to need you to explain to me what all of these words mean. That's okay. They will. Your developers will help you. They just want you to make sure that the client doesn't hate them at the end of the day and they stay on track. You can also do what I did and get into it through design. You know, I started designing websites. I started attending camps. I was hanging around with a lot of people who were talking about things that were a lot further above my head than I'd like to admit. My path into Drupal involved me being able to explain the concept of entity field queries in Drupal 7, but not knowing how to add a field to a content type. I learned it backwards. In fact, there was one day at one of my jobs where I was responsible for debugging a very complex system that involved RSS feeding and machine translation and all of this craziness. And one of the things I had to do was add a field to a content type so that I could do the XML mapping from all of this crazy stuff. And I was like, sweet, got this. I'm just gonna add the code over here into the file that's pulling this in for the migration. I'm gonna do da-da-da-da. And then I was like, yeah, fields, content types, let me look that up. I had no idea. And that was a very surreal moment for me because usually I got the sites when all that setup work was done. Why did I need to worry about it? So you don't have to know it all to get there. Fake it till you make it in a degree. The most important piece there is knowing where to look to get the help and knowing who to talk to quietly, sometimes behind the scenes, so that you can kind of do the verification of, if I said this to somebody who knew what they were talking about, would they think I was stupid? I have never done that. I've done that. There's also, the field where I am in customer success. There is some technical knowledge required. I do spend a lot of time digging into code, digging into New Relic, digging into various pieces. When I was at Lingotech, I was literally going into Drupal 7, Drupal 8 WordPress sites, digging through code, finding things that were hard-coded in template files, and there was a lot there. But it's not quite the same as sitting down and writing something from scratch. I wasn't writing custom modules to solve a problem. I was helping somebody else who had all that knowledge to kind of find out where the problem was. And that's a different type of technical. It's a way to learn more about the technical to get to that point. So if you kind of have that very wide breadth of knowledge, but not the depth, consider that kind of role. And then going in, the completely different directions, there's marketing roles, there's human resources, there's all those kinds of, I guess in a way we consider them support roles. They're non-technical, but they're part of the community still. The marketing teams are still coming to these events. They're still involved in these events. Even if you're in accounting and you're like, no, I want to be doing this technical stuff. If you're working in an office with a whole bunch of technical people, it's going to rub off on you whether you want it to or not. If you're around it, you'll end up like me, being able to explain the entity field queries and not knowing the basics. So that's kind of, to me, that's the big thing. Like if you really want to make a switch, if you're currently in a career path that you don't love and you want to get into this technology, I'm pretty sure that if we sat down in the hallway for a minute and started talking about it, we can find the transferable skills and we can make the case and say, this is what you need to do. This is who you need to talk to. This is the route to take. And you can do this and it'll be okay. So yeah. In summation, we'll pass it back to Aaron.
A couple final thoughts and suggestions. One of the things that I benefited from early on and had the opportunity to do was, in a nonprofit organization, everybody ends up playing outside their comfort area and playing outside their normal role because you really have no choice. And it meant I spent a lot of time thinking about projects from a variety of different perspectives and realizing over time the value of having sat at various seats at the table on various projects. So whether it's as a developer spending time creating content, as a content editor spending time worrying about UX, as a photographer spending time working out the CSS to lay things out, being taking a turn as the project manager, trying to sit at any opportunity you get at a different seat at the table. Take it on from every perspective you can and try to understand why it is that somebody else is holding the position and the concerns that they have. It was kind of an obligatory part of operating in a nonprofit when I was there. But when I became a consultant, it became a thing that becomes reassuring to clients to be able to sit down and say, oh, you're the marketing director, and you couldn't care less about the technical plumbing here about how this integration's gonna work. You worry a great deal about how you're gonna talk to your audience about how we're changing out your portal and what kinds of language do we need to be using, and let me help you think through what are we saying and how are we making our word choices so that the interface that we're building for you works for your audience and goes with your message strategies. And that you can help those clients feel heard and be heard if you've got as diverse a set of experiences as you can. It also helps you work even on an in-house team when you're trying to get along with other people of the, oh, I understand why the graphic designer is really picky about this detail. We were joking as people were coming in of, I don't see fonts real well, I don't pick them up, but I do actually understand their importance, and I'm really, really glad to have people on my teams who do see that and take good care of it, because I know it's a weak spot of mine. But I do actually understand why it's valuable, because I've tried to do that work. And so being able to sit in those roles helps you be a better team player, and when you're in consulting roles, helps you understand the client better and help them continue to move forward.
Yeah, and kind of tagging on with that, I've just mentioned this, but if you're not technical, hanging around with technical people is another way to kind of jump into that, try the different seats, see things. You know, I personally have not been a true developer for a few years now, we're gonna go with. But I still know a lot of developers. I still hang out with them. I still hear what they're saying. And so for me, when I walk into a call with customers, I can empathize and I can be like, oh, I have not dealt with that, but my husband, who's a Drupal developer, was kind of complaining about that the other day. Like, I get it. Like, this is not a good situation. Let's fix it. You can bring in that empathy. You can hear those pieces. And all of that knowledge helps me do better in my role, not necessarily in the most technical capacity, but sometimes it is getting a lot more technical. You know, I hear things at camps, and I don't remember all of it, but I remember a word, I remember a situation, I remember a phrase, or I know listening to, Aaron talking about other things sometimes. Later on, that information comes up again. Like somebody says a key word, and I'm like, oh, I've heard of that before. And I remember that there was something weird. Let me go talk to Aaron real quick and find out what he was talking about way back then and see if he still remembers, so that I can start doing the research and get down this path. And that is really helpful in like that long term trying to move forward, trying to find a career in technology. It also kind of ties in a lot with the things that Aaron was talking about. It all applies even in the slightly less technical world of get to know people, be aware of the community, have the resources, be friendly. If you go to camps and you aren't in a technical role but you want to be, going to camps and becoming a familiar face that is known, when you go to apply for that job and you walk into a thing and the person sitting across from you is someone who's seen you at a camp for like 3 years, they're gonna be like, oh, hey, I know you. You're part of the community. Oh my gosh, you aren't working in Drupal right now? Okay, we need to fix that. Like, that happens. That's when I got my first job at Lingotech, to break specifically into the Drupal community more so, away from the publishing company. I talked to them at DrupalCon. That's how I got in the door. I was able to talk to the guy who would be my boss in person. We were both at this event. And he was like, yeah, all right. It took 9 months, but they had to get the funding, create the role, everything. But it was that connection at a camp that allowed me to get more firmly into the Drupal community. And same thing with Commerce Guys, same things with Pantheon. I've been seeing these people at camps for a long time. They knew who I was. I wasn't walking around acting like a jerk. And they gave me a chance. So, any questions?
So I have a lot of transferable skills. So I've been an animator, a graphic designer, so and it's really cool because like every job I've taken has had me been a team of one, and then become the manager to teach people.
Awesome.
so my thing is I'm trying to become a project manager in Drupal. How would I go about, I mean, we obviously have a career stuff, how would I go about presenting those transferable skills to Drupal companies or other tech companies? My biggest feedback I'm getting from agencies is like, oh, you lack agency experience. So how do you kind of figure out which target market to hit or which company the size is to kind of benefit them?
Yeah, that is an interesting one, because you're right. When you start talking to Drupal agencies, a lot of times the agency experience is a lot different than the product side experience. And so you may have to take a slightly more circuitous route to get where you want to go than what you're thinking. In that it might be worth looking for a company that uses Drupal, that has an in-house web team or is working with vendors and needs somebody to help manage those projects, and go to them and say, hey, I've been unofficially doing the PM role because I've been managing this group of people. It's a team of people. I'm in charge of handling the scheduling, making sure we're hitting deadlines, doing the coordination, because I suspect you're doing a lot of things that are what a project manager would do. That's just not your job title. And that's how you present it to them. You know, when you're doing your resume, you list out what it is that you are doing in addition to your title. And then in the interview process, you say, I understand that my title isn't project manager, but here are all the tasks of a project manager that I'm doing, and I would like to make the change. And a product team will generally give you a little bit more leeway there, and that'll help you get your foot in the door to understand how project management with Drupal goes. And then from there, after you've done that for a while, you go to an agency and you say, hey, I've been working in this product team for Drupal for a long time. I've been working with agencies, or I've been working with these different vendors, and I really would like to get into the agency sphere.
The other thing I would latch on to, because you were asking about size, and I think my experience has been that for those kind of breaking in roles, it's you looking at the relative extremes in terms of size tends to be a little more successful in terms of the breaking in. Mm-hmm. That the mid-sized companies tend to have an established routine. They want people that they are relatively confident they can bring into that routine, but they're not so large that they have lots of positions and they need people. Whereas the large companies, they tend to need, when they're looking for talent, they don't tend to hire one, they're hiring three.
And they're willing to take a more junior person at that point to train up in their way as well.
There's some of that, and they also recognize they may be turning people over, and so there's a little more tolerance to risk. And at the small end, there can be a little bit more of the trying to find a person, and they're trying to find somebody who's going to be a match to them, not necessarily somebody who is fully buzzword compliant with all of the right
all the
set
PMP
of
certifications.
Yeah, you know, all the right checkboxes, but it's going to fit well with their team of 10. And if you can fit into that team, that's going to go well. If you don't fit into that team, it's not. I mean, they're because that's how those companies are. The other thing I will say on the size is I have learned personally, having worked at very small companies and very large companies, I have a personal preference for large and well-structured and well-organized fits my personal style better than the small dynamic, but you never know what the rules are and you never know how things are going to operate next week. And so also thinking about what kind of stability do you have a personal preference for, so that you're pretty confident you'll fit in and do well in the structure of the actual organization once you're there.
I will say, for learning, the large and quote-unquote stodgy organizations that have rules and regulations and a process is usually a calmer environment to cut your teeth on. Just because there is a set of expectations, and while you are trying to learn all of the ins and outs of a job, that's really all you want to focus on. You don't also want to focus on, we're a startup and suddenly we're going to do a 180 and go a different direction, and now everything that I was doing is different. So that's something to kind of bear in mind too. But also look for project management user groups in your area. Are you local to Atlanta? Virginia? Okay. I'm sure that there's got to be some up there, but I know, like, where I live in Augusta, Georgia, there is a project management and like Scrum Master organization that has a monthly meetup, and going to that can start helping get more hands-on advice from people who've done it. So, any other questions? Awesome. Well, thank you guys very much for being here bright and early. We appreciate it a lot. Hope you guys enjoy the rest of the day. I hear there's coffee out front if you're interested.
At least there was when we came in.
Yeah, there may not be now. But thank you guys.
And we got a couple minutes before the keynotes. I think we're running really right on time.
Yeah. Awesome. Thank you all.